The order came to me in writing, which is how I knew it was serious. Nobody puts a small crime on paper. It was 6:10 on a Tuesday in Frost Month, and I was alone in the stone room with the lamps lit, and the book open at the quarter-day accounts, when Steward Ho came down the 11 steps with an envelope held out in front of him like a plate he did not want to carry. "For the clerk of the book," he said. "I'm the under-clerk. Keeper Marrow is the clerk of the book. Everyone knows that." "Keeper Marrow is unwell," Ho said, "and the instruction is for the person at the desk." He set the envelope on the ledge beside my inkstand, and he looked at it, and then at the door, and then he went out without another word, which was the loudest thing he had ever said to me. My name is Wren Otley. At that time I was 26, and I had spent 4 years copying other people's handwriting into the book of the household of the Royal House of Harrogate, which is not a glamorous life and which I loved. The book is not a diary. It is a register, the plainest, coldest, most stubborn object in the Kingdom of Eldermoor. In it are the warrants of residence, every soul not of the blood of the reigning house who sleeps, works, or keeps keys inside the palace. In it are the gate logs who passed which gate, at what hour, carrying what. And in it are the night watch orders, which guardsman stood at which door, from when until when, and by whose word he was posted, and by whose word relieved. Its covers are oak boards, its folios are stitched with waxed linen thread, and it weighs as much as a small dog. It lives on a slate ledge in the stone room, 6 steps beneath the threshold, and it does not leave. That is not a custom. It is a regulation, and it is older than the palace's plumbing. I opened the envelope. The paper inside was the Queen Consort's own, cream, heavy, with the double-thorn watermark she used for household business, and the hand was Lady Verina's, small and elegant and slanting hard to the right. The book of the household is to be rebound. The binding is failing at the foredge. Folios 405 to 420 are water-damaged beyond use and are to be lifted out and destroyed. Fresh leaves are to be stitched in and the entries recopied from the duplicate rolls. This work is to be completed before the Feast of Lanterns. The under-clerk will attend to it. I read it 3 times. Then I got up and went to the ledge and turned the book to folio 405, and I ran my thumb down the foredge of the next 15 leaves, and there was no water damage. There had never been water damage. The paper was dry and hard, and it made the small, clean sound old rag paper makes, like a dry leaf, like a struck match. I stood there a long moment with my thumb on the edge of folio 411. Now you should understand that I am not brave. I want that on the record since I am the one keeping it. But there is a thing that happens to a person who has spent 4 years learning exactly how a document is supposed to look, and it happened to me that evening, and it was not courage. It was closer to nausea. Somebody wanted a page. They had wrapped the page they wanted in 15 other pages so that it would not look like a page. They had given the whole bundle a reason water. That was a lie I could disprove with my thumb. And they had sent the order to me, the under-clerk, at 6:10, when the stone room is empty and the keeper is upstairs in his bed, and there is nobody in the corridor to ask a question. I did not lift the leaves. Instead, I did the only brave thing I have ever done, and it took me 11 minutes, and it consisted of walking up 2 flights of stairs. Keeper Ansel Marrow had a room off the threshold with 1 window, 1 chair, 1 bed, and 1 lamp, and by then he had been in the bed for 9 days. He was 81. He had held the office of keeper of the threshold for 34 years, and before that he had stood a post like any other guardsman, and before that he had been a boy in a village with a name I never learned. His hands on the coverlet were the color of candle wax and were still perfectly steady, which I found unfair. He read the order twice. Then he read it a 3rd time, which frightened me more than anything he could have said. "Water," he said. "There's no water, sir." "No," he handed the paper back. "There is no water. Wren, look at the foredge of 411 for me and tell me what you see." I already did, it's dry. Not the damage, the stitching. I had not looked at the stitching. I went back down and I looked, and I came back up, and I sat on the edge of the chair with my hands between my knees, because my legs had gone strange. It's been out before, I said. How can you tell? The thread holes. My voice sounded like somebody else's further down the corridor. There are 2 sets. The old ones are wider apart. Somebody unstitched Folio 411 and stitched it back in with a finer needle, and they did it well, but they didn't match the pitch. It's been out of the book at least once and it went back in. Marrow closed his eyes. For a moment I thought he had gone to sleep, and I thought, with a spike of something ugly, don't you dare. Then it wasn't destroyed, he said. They took it out to read it or to copy it or to see whether it said what they feared it said, and it did. And they put it back because a missing folio is a scandal and a returned folio is nothing at all. And now, 11 years on, they have got tired of it sitting there. He opened his eyes. Go and fetch Sergeant Major Kell. The threshold sergeant. The threshold sergeant. Go on, don't run. Never run in the palace, it makes people ask you questions. Sergeant Major Osric Kell was 30 years old that winter, and for 4 years he had stood at the threshold door, the plain black door at the head of the 11 steps, through which every warranted person in the palace must, at least once, walk to be entered in the book. Before that, the Queen's door, the long gallery, the sallow court, the garden stair, the gate, in the order a guardsman climbs those posts, which is slowly. I had spoken perhaps 40 words to him in 4 years. He was the sort of man who made you count. Tall, dark-haired, a face that did not offer you anything, and a stillness that was not the theatrical stillness of the forecourt sentries with the tourists photographing them, but something drier and more permanent, like a stone in a field. He came up the corridor behind me without any noise at all, and Marrow said, "Sergeant Major, there is an order on the ledge downstairs and a book with a page in it. Read the order first." Kell read it, his face did nothing. "Now go down and read Folio 411, Marrow said. "And Wren goes with you, because a leaf of the book is not turned without 2 pairs of eyes, and I cannot go down the stairs." We went down. He stood at the ledge with his gloves off. He took them off, which I had never seen, and I turned the book, and there it was. Folio 411. The night watch orders for the 14th of Ash month, 11 years before. Ruled columns. Post name from until, by whose word posted, by whose word relieved. 22 lines of the plainest handwriting in the world, Keeper Marrow's own, and the ink gone the brown that black ink goes. The 11th line read, Queen's Door, GDSM. O'Kell, posted 800, relieved 1140 by written order countersigned, post left vacant by instruction until 1230, GDSM. O. Kell reposted, long gallery, 1145. I did not know then what the 14th of Ash month was. I was 15 years old that year, and I lived 100 miles away, and it was the day my father sold the cart horse, which is the only reason I can tell you where I was. But I watched a man read his own name, and I have never forgotten how quiet a thing that is. He did not move. He did not make a sound, but he had come down those stairs a certain size, and standing at that ledge he became a different size, and the change happened in his shoulders, which came down about 1/4 of an inch, and in his hands, which flattened on the slate on either side of the book as though he needed it to stay where it was. "Sergeant Major," I said. "That's my name," he said. "That's my post. That's the hour." He read it again. "Relieved by written order countersigned. I remember the paper. I have remembered the paper for 11 years, and I have never once seen it again, and it is not in this book, because a written order is a loose leaf, and loose leaves are filed in the threshold roll, and the threshold roll for that quarter is missing," I said. "I know. It's the only quarter that's missing. I asked Keeper Marrow about it in my first month. He said it had been mislaid before his time, which was a strange thing for him to say, because it was not before his time." Kell stood very still. Then he said, "What is the 14th of Ash month?" And I said, "I don't know, sir." And he looked at me with a kind of terrible patience and said, "Yes, you do. Everyone in this palace does, think." And then I did know, and my hand went to my mouth, and I was ashamed of the gesture even while I was making it. The 14th of Ash month is the night Queen Isolde died. Here is what everybody in the realm knows about that night, because it was in every paper, and it has been in every book since. Queen Isolde of Eldermoor, 39 years old, took a fever in the second week of Ash month. It went into her chest. It was expected to turn, and it did not turn. On the evening of the 14th, her physician, Dr. Revoke, told the household that she was comfortable and that the king, who had sat with her all day and had not slept in 3, should be allowed 4 hours rest. The king went to his rooms at 10. At midnight he was woken. He reached her door at 1:12. She had died at 17 minutes to 1. The histories call it a mercy, that she went quietly, that she did not suffer, that the king only left her side because a good doctor made him. The histories also say, in a line or two, that in 11 years King Alaric has not once been heard to mention his first wife's death. Not in a speech, not at the anniversary service, not to his own son. That he goes to the chapel every 14th of Ash month and stands at the back like a man attending someone else's funeral, and then goes out to the south wall of the garden and stands there a while, and then goes back to work. I had always thought that was grief. I have since learned that it was grief, and that it was also a room with no floor in it, and that a man can stand in such a room for 11 years if nobody offers him the truth, because the truth is the only thing heavy enough to fall through. "Wren," said Sergeant Major Kell, "where are the gate logs for that night?" "Same volume, Folio 409. "Turn back to." I turned back to the Queen's Gate log, the 14th of Ash month. The Queen's Gate is the small gate on the east side, the one with the courtesy on it. The courtesy that says the Queen's Gate is not searched, because it was built for a queen who wanted to come home from a ride without a sergeant looking in her saddlebags, and because 300 years of the household have decided that the dignity of the thing outweighs the risk of it. 11 entries, and the 9th of them said, 1152, refused entry, P. Small, runner on foot from the physician's lodge carrying, turned back by instruction of the mistress of the household. Gate resealed 1154. Carrying, Kell said. Carrying what? It doesn't say. No, it doesn't. He put his gloves back on, finger by finger, and each one took him about a year. A runner from the physician's lodge came to the Queen's Gate at 8 minutes to midnight, on the night the Queen died, carrying something, and he was turned back at the gate. And the Queen's door had stood empty for 12 minutes by then, and would stand empty for another 38. He looked at me. The stone had gone out of the field. There was a man there. "Miss Otley," he said, "I was 19 years old. I was told to leave that door, and I left it. I have told myself for 11 years that the order was lawful, because it was written and it was countersigned, and a written countersigned order is the whole of a young man's world." He closed the book, gently, the way you would close a door on a sleeping person. "Fetch me a lamp and the register of hands. I want to look at that countersignature." The register of hands is a clerk's tool nobody outside the stone room has ever heard of. A fat, ugly album in which every officer entitled to sign or countersign an entry has written his name, 3 times on the day he took office. Marrow is on page 9, 8 times over. He had renewed the sample every 5th year, being thorough, and the 8 Ansel Marrows walk slowly across 3 decades, the last shakier than the first, and they are all unmistakably the same man. I set the album beside the book with the lamp between them, and we bent over it like 2 physicians over a patient. The countersignature on Folio 411 read *A, Marrow, KPR. It was a good forgery. Somebody had worked at it. The proportions were right. The slant was right. The way the *R* in Marrow dropped below the line was right, and the little upward flick at the end that Marrow could not stop himself making was there. But the M was wrong. Keeper Marrow, somewhere in his 20s, had picked up a habit I have never seen in another hand. He began the capital *M* at the bottom, not the top, a straight stroke driven upward first, then down, then up, then down. It means the first leg of his M is thicker at the foot than at the head, because that is where the nib bit and the ink pooled. It is invisible unless you know. I knew because I had copied his hand 400 times. The M on Folio 411 was thick at the top and thin at the bottom. It had been written by somebody who had studied Ansel Marrow's signature very carefully and had never once watched his hand move. "That is not his," I said. "That is a copy of his." Kell said nothing for a while. Then, "Whose?" "I can't tell you whose, not from 3 words. I was already turning pages because there is a part of my brain that goes on being a clerk when the rest of me is falling over. But I can tell you what to look for. Someone who slants hard right. Someone who was taught to make capitals from the top down, most people were, and who is fast and confident, and who has an unusual habit of finishing a word with a downstroke instead of lifting the pen. Look, I put my finger on it. The W in Marrow, it ends going down and left into nothing. Nobody does that. It's a return stroke. It's the beginning of a letter that never got written." Kell looked at the envelope on the ledge, the one Steward Ho had brought down at 6:10, in the small, elegant, hard-slanting hand of Lady Verena, mistress of the household warrants, daughter of the Queen Consort. He did not say anything. He didn't need to. I was looking at it too. The W and asterisk below went down and left, into nothing. A reasonable person at that moment goes home, closes the album, puts the book back on the ledge, and lifts 15 leaves out of it before the Feast of Lanterns, because a reasonable person has a mother in Cold Hero with a bad hip and a stipend of 40 crowns a quarter and no other trade in the world. I did not go home, and it was not virtue. It was that I had spent 4 years being the only person in the palace who cared what the book said, and I had just discovered that I was not the only one. Somebody else cared so much they were prepared to take a page out. That is a strange kind of company to find yourself in, and it does something to you. We went back up to Marrow. He listened without opening his eyes, and when we had finished he said, "Sergeant Major, on the 14th of Ashmonth, 11 years ago, where was I?" "You were at the threshold, sir." "I was at the threshold from 8 in the evening until 4 in the morning, because that is where the keeper stands on a night when the Queen is dying, in case the King should need something brought or taken or sworn. 20 people saw me. I signed nothing that night. I countersigned nothing that night. I was asked for nothing that night." His voice was very level. "I have known for 11 years that somebody used my name on that page. I have known it since the morning I read it back and found a line I did not write. And I did nothing, and I will tell you exactly why, and then you may think of me what you like." Neither of us said anything. "Because the Queen was dead," Marrow said, "and the King was destroyed, and I had a piece of paper that said one of the Queen Consort's people had forged a keeper's countersign to empty a doorway on the night a woman died. If I had taken it upstairs in that first year, they would have called me a mad old man tormenting a grieving king, and they would have been half right, because I had no proof of *Y. A cleared doorway is not a crime. A forged countersign is a crime, but a small one, and 11 years old, and its author was a young woman of 22 who could be made very sorry and very pitiable in front of a court. So I decided the page would stay in the book, and I would stay at the threshold, and I would keep both of them safe until somebody came who could carry the rest of it. That is not honor. That is the arithmetic of a coward with a good filing system." He opened his eyes and looked at Kell, and I understood that this had been coming down the corridor at us for a long time. "And in 11 years, Sergeant Major, the only person who ever asked me what happened to the threshold roll for that quarter is a girl of 22 in her first month, and the only person who ever asked me why the Queen's door stood empty for 50 minutes is you. Twice. Once at 19 and once at 26. I told you both times to let it alone." "You did, sir." "I was wrong both times," said Ansel Marrow, "and I am 81, and there is a letter downstairs telling a girl to burn my book, so we will now stop letting it alone." They came for him on the Friday. It was done properly, which was the worst of it. There was a certificate, signed by 2 physicians, and neither of them was lying. Ansel Marrow was 81, had a failing heart, and had not left his bed in 12 days, and the certificate said only that he could no longer discharge the physical duties of the office, which was true. The certificate went to the household, which is the Queen Consort's to run. That is not a scandal, that is simply the office. Morwenna had run it for 9 years, and I will say this for her, she ran it well. The linen was good, the accounts balanced, the staff were paid on time. And the household proposed a new keeper of the threshold, a courteous, competent, entirely pleasant man named Osric Kell, the Queen Consort's own understeward, who would have been confirmed by the end of the month, and who would have found on his very first inspection of the book that folios 405 to 420 were water-damaged beyond use. See how clean it was. Nobody broke a law. An old man was ill, a good man was proposed, a damaged book was to be mended. Put the whole of it in front of a court, and the court would have thanked them for their diligence. That is what I had not understood about how a thing like this is done. It is not done by villains in a cellar. It is done by reasonable people, in daylight, on the correct forms, one polite step at a time. And the only thing standing across the corridor is some elderly regulation everybody has agreed to think of as a formality. The elderly regulation in this case was the keeper's right of naming. It is on the first page of the book, in the founding hand, and it has not been amended in 290 years, and every keeper knows it, and no keeper had used it in living memory, because in living memory no keeper had needed to. The keeper of the threshold holds his office of the crown and not of the household. He is appointed by the king. He may be removed by the king. He may be removed by no other person, by no other office, and by no vote of the household, and if he becomes unable to stand, he may name his own successor from among the warranted guard of the palace, and that naming stands until the king unmakes it. Of the crown and not of the household, 6 words, they are why there is a book at all. Ansel Marrow used them on the last night of frost month, at 11 o'clock at night, propped up on 3 pillows with a shawl round his shoulders that made him look like somebody's grandmother, and with the whole thing conducted so exactly by the letter that not even Advocate Pell could find a crack in it afterwards, though he spent 2 months looking. He required the book to be brought up, which is permitted when the keeper cannot come down. He required 2 witnesses of the warranted staff, and he chose me and Captain Roswin Dace, who commanded the palace guard and who came at 11 at night in her greatcoat and stood at the foot of the bed with her jaw set like a shut gate. He required the candidate to be present, and he required, this is the part that has stayed with me, that the candidate be asked the question. His hand was steady, it was always steady. He wrote the entry himself. Then he said, Sergeant Major Osric Kell of the Threshold. The keeper of the threshold is not a soldier obeys. The keeper is the man who tells the palace who may come in and who must go out, and he answers for it to the crown, and there will come a day when the crown itself will tell him he is wrong, and he will have to decide whether the crown is speaking or a tired man in a crown is speaking, and those are not the same, and nobody will help him tell the difference. Knowing that, do you take it? There was a silence in that little room that I can still hear. And Kell said, Sir, I stood at the Queen's door on the 14th of Ash month, and I walked away from it because a piece of paper told me to. If I take this, that will be the first thing I put in the book under my own name, and it will stay there as long as the book does. That is not an answer to my question. It is the only honest one I have, sir. Yes, I take it. Marrow signed. Dace signed. I signed, and my hand shook so badly that the entry is the worst piece of penmanship in 300 years of that volume, and it is still there, and I have never been able to look at it without wanting to be sick and also, in a small mean corner of myself, being proud. Then the old man gave him the key to the stone room off his own neck, and lay back and said, "Now go and stand at your door, keeper. There is nothing more tiresome than being watched by people waiting for you to die." He died 9 days later in his sleep before the Feast of Lanterns, and the household gave him a very fine funeral, and the Queen Consort walked behind his coffin with her head bowed, and I do not believe for one moment that she was pretending. That is another thing I learned that winter. People are not one thing. She could grieve for a good old servant on a Thursday and have spent Tuesday trying to burn what he protected, and both of them were true, and neither canceled the other, and that is the most frightening fact I know about human beings. But the book had a keeper, and the keeper's name was Osric Kell, and he had been 19 years old on the 14th of Ashmonth, and he had walked away from a door. The Queen Consort sent for him on the second day. I know what happened in that room because Kell told me, that evening at the ledge, in the flat voice of a man making a report, and because he required me to write it down, which is why it is in the book, and why it was read aloud in a court 11 weeks later with 300 people listening. That was his method. He wrote everything down, every conversation, every offer, every threat in the plainest language with the date and the hour entered under his own name and signed. He did not accuse. He put it where it could be found. I said to him once, "Sir, you're making an awful lot of evidence against yourself." "I am making a record. If I am wrong it will hang me, and it should. Write it down, Miss Otley." Queen Consort Morwenna received him in the amber room. She was a handsome woman of 54, and she had a manner I can only describe as asterisk warmth used as a tool. She was disarmingly kind to servants. She remembered your mother's hip. She asked after it. She meant it, and none of that had anything whatever to do with what she was going to do to you. She congratulated him on the office. She said Ansel Marrow had been a fine man and that she had wept at his funeral, and both of those things were true. Then she said the household had been considering that the burden of the book was too heavy for one man, that the keeper should have a proper staff, a proper office upstairs, a proper salary, that a man of 30 who had come up from a village post in 11 years was clearly a man of parts, that the colors were shortly to be short of a captain, and that the king was very open to her suggestions in such matters. And she said, in the same warm and reasonable voice, that the book was in a shocking condition, that folios 405 to 420 were water-damaged beyond use, and that she would be glad to have it taken up to the bindery on Thursday. Kell said, "Madam, the book does not leave the stone room." She said that she was aware of the tradition. He said, "It is not a tradition, madam. It is the regulation on the first page, and it is why there is a book. If the book can be carried out of the room by whoever is currently strongest, then it is not a record. It is a rumor with a spine." She said that he was being absurd, and she laughed, and she said it with real affection, which is a thing you cannot do unless you have practiced. And Kell said, "There is no water in the book, madam. I have looked. I looked with a lamp and I looked with the foredge to the light, and folios 405 to 420 are as dry as this room. I am obliged to tell you that the order sent down to the stone room on the 18th of frost month states a fact that is not true, and I am obliged to enter that in the book, and I have entered it." And there it was. The temperature of the whole winter changed in that one sentence, and both of them knew it, and neither of them raised their voice. She asked him what exactly he was accusing her of. And he said, and I copied this into the book from his mouth, word for word, and Advocate Pell later spent 40 minutes trying to make it mean something other than what it means. Madam, I am not accusing you of anything. I am the keeper of the threshold. I do not accuse. I record. The book will say what happened, and it will say who signed, and it will say what was asked for and what was refused, and it will still be saying it in 300 years when you and I are both nothing at all. If there is nothing in it that harms you, then you have nothing to fear from a page of dry paper. And if there is something in it that harms you, madam, then it is not the page that harmed you. She did not shout. I want that understood because it would be easier to tell you this story if she had. She simply stopped being warm in the way a lamp stops being lit, and she said pleasantly, "You are new to your office, keeper, and you have chosen a very fast way to be old in it." And she rang the bell, and he went out. That night the stone room lock was changed. Kell had the smith come down at 10 at night and stood over him while he did it, and entered the smith's name in the book, and the hour and the reason, and had the smith sign it. I said, "Sir, that's going to look like an accusation." "It is going to look like exactly what it is," he said. "A man protecting a book." If she had shrugged then and let the old dry pages sit, I think it would have gone no further. But she could not let it sit, and I have thought about why, and I believe I know. It was not the forged countersign. A girl of 22 forging a signature is a scandal, not a ruin. It was what came after the forgery. It was the 11 years. Padraig Small was not hard to find, which tells you how little anybody had looked. He was 51 and he kept a boat hire at Marlow Reach, 4 hours downriver, and he had been the physician's lodge runner for 6 years before he had been paid, quite generously, to stop being it. He was a big, sad, honest man who had spent 11 years telling the story to anyone who would sit still, and no one had ever sat still, and by the time Kell and I got off the boat he had stopped believing that anyone ever would. He sat us down in a shed that smelled of tar, and told it in about 4 minutes, which is how long it takes to tell the truth. He had been on duty in the physician's lodge on the 14th of Ash month. At about 11:15 at night Dr. Cray came out of the Queen's rooms with a message in his own hand, on the lodge's own paper, and put it into Padraig's hand and said, "Take that to the King's apartments. Not to a footman, not to a secretary. To the King's own door, and tell the man on the door it is from me, and it is urgent, and he is to wake His Majesty at once." "What did it say?" I asked. "I don't read the messages, miss," said Padraig, and then with a terrible mildness, "but he told me what was in it, because he wanted me to be able to say it out loud if the paper got wet. He said, 'Tell them the Queen has taken a turn and she is asking for him and he should come now.'" "Asking for him," Kell said. "That's what the doctor said. She was asking for him." Padraig went out across the yard and up to the Queen's gate, which is the short way, the way a runner goes, and which knocks 7 minutes off the walk, and he presented himself at 8 minutes to midnight. And the Queen's gate was shut. Not locked, shut, with 2 of the household's own men on it, which was itself unusual, because the Queen's gate is a guard post and not a household post. And Lady Verena, mistress of the household, 22 years old, came out to the gate in a grey coat, and told him that the King was not to be disturbed, that the physician's own instruction had been that the King should rest, that this was a countermanded message and a nuisance, and that if he did not go back to the lodge she would have his place. "And I went back," said Padraig Small. He said it without any drama at all, and he looked at the floor of the shed, and outside a rope was knocking on a mast somewhere, and I have not been able to hear that sound since without feeling ill. "I was 22 years older than the boy on the Queen's door," he said, "and I let a girl of 22 send me home with a doctor's urgent message in my coat. I told myself she'd know. She was the mistress of the household. She'd know what the King had ordered and what he hadn't." Kell did not say anything for a while. Then he said, "Mr. Small, I was the boy on the Queen's door." And Padraig Small looked up at him, and his face did something I hope not to see again. Then you know, he said. Yes. I've been telling people for 11 years. I know. Nobody sits still. I'm sitting still, said the keeper of the threshold. Tell me the rest. The rest was this. Padraig went back and told Dr. Cray the message had been countermanded. Cray, not a fool, but a tired man 4 days without sleep who wanted very badly to believe somebody upstairs had a grip on things, said, countermanded by whom? And Padraig said, the mistress of the household, sir. Asterisk, and Cray said, then that's the king's own order. She'd not do it otherwise, and went back up to the queen. At 20 to 1 he came out and sent his own senior man the long way round, through the main gate, running. That man reached the king's apartments at 8 minutes past 1. King Alaric was awake in 4 minutes and at his wife's door in 12. Queen Isolde had died at 17 minutes to 1. She had asked for him at a quarter past 11, and again, Cray's day book, which I have held in my own hands, written in a doctor's crabbed shorthand and none the less the most eloquent document I have ever read, at 11:40 and at 12:05 and at 12:31, which is the last entry in her name. PT asks for HM, told he is sent for. PT asks again, told he is coming. PT asks a third time, told he is on the stair. PT quiet. He wrote, told he is on the stair, because he had run out of things to tell her. She was asking for her husband, and they told her he was coming, and he was not coming, because nobody had told him she had asked. And that is the thing that lived in the book. That is the thing that a page of dry paper had been carrying for 11 years, not a forged signature, not an empty doorway. Those are only the mechanism. The thing itself is that a woman died asking 4 times for the man she had been married to for 18 years, and he was 200 yards away, asleep, and had been let sleep. We came back up the river the next morning. Kell stood in the bow the whole way with his hands behind his back, saying nothing, and I sat behind him and watched the water and tried to make my hands stop. Somewhere below the last lock, without turning round, he said, "You will want to take this to the king." "Of course we are, sir." "Not yet. Because what I would be handing him is a runner's word against a lady's word, a day book that says nothing about the gate, and a countersignature that a court would have to be persuaded, by an expert on a technicality, is not the hand of a dead man." He turned round. "And I would be handing it to a husband, not a judge. A husband who has spent 11 years believing his wife died comfortable and quiet, and that he was not there because a good physician made him sleep. I would be taking that away and giving him a suspicion, a splinter he can never put down and never prove. When I go to the king," he said, "I go with something he cannot argue with, because I am only going to be able to do this to him once." So he went at the Queen's Gate instead. Understand what the Queen's Gate was by then, and why the household loved it so. 300 years ago, a Queen of Eldermoor came home from a ride in the rain, and a sergeant at the East Gate asked to see inside her saddlebags. She let him. Then she had a small stone gate cut into the east wall with her own money, and had it written into the standing orders that the Queen's Gate is not searched. The idea was dignity. It was even a good idea once. By the winter I am describing, it had become the most useful door in the kingdom. It was not searched, therefore nothing that passed through it was written down, and the household, whose right-of-way it was, had over 9 years quietly moved its whole logistical life onto it. Furniture, crates, estate wagons. The household's own carrier, twice a week, on a standing pass signed by the warden of the Queen's Gate, who was Lord Cassius, son of the Queen Consort, a pleasant, unhurried man of 36 with a good tailor and a bad estate in the north that had been swallowing money for a decade. Now the keeper of the threshold cannot search a gate. He has no soldiers. He is a clerk with a rifle and a key. But the keeper of the threshold keeps the gate logs, and the gate logs are kept by Warrant *, and a warranted officer of the household who declines to make a true entry in the gate log of what he has passed through his gate is in breach of his warrant, and the keeper may. This is the whole of his power, and it sounds like nothing, and it is not nothing, require the entry asterisk. Kell went down to the Queen's Gate on the 1st of Greenmonth with the book under his arm and Captain Dace beside him, and he did not order a search, and he did not stop a wagon, and he did not touch anybody's property. He stood at the gate with the book open on a trestle and required the entry. Wagon household carrier, contents. The carrier said he didn't know, he only drove. Then we will ask the warden. And he entered in the book in front of the carrier and the 2 household men and Captain Dace and me. Household carrier, out, contents undeclared. Warden of the Queen's Gate required to declare within 24 hours under warrant. And he signed it, and he had Dace witness it, and he let the wagon go. That was all, he let it go. I could have hit him. Miss Otley, he said, if I stop that wagon, I am a man who seized a nobleman's property on a suspicion, and by Thursday I am a former keeper. If I let it go and write down that he would not say what was in it, then by Thursday he must either tell me what was in it or refuse to tell me, in writing, and both of those are worse for him than the wagon. Lord Cassius declared within 24 hours, in a very good-humored letter, estate effects, personal, of no interest to the household or the crown. Kell entered the letter in the book whole, and then he required the entry for the next wagon, and the next. Every wagon out of that gate for 11 days. Each one entered, each one undeclared, each one followed by a required declaration and a good-humored letter, until there were 14 good-humored letters in the book all saying estate effects, personal asterisk, all signed by the same hand, and the whole thing had the look, I did not see it coming, and neither did Cassius, of a man building a fence, 1 post at a time in full daylight in front of the person he was fencing in. On the 12th day Cassius made the mistake of a man who has never had to be careful. He sent a wagon out through the Queen's Gate at 4 in the morning without a carrier's pass. Kell was on the gate. He had been on that gate at 4 in the morning every morning for 11 days and told nobody, and had slept, as far as I can tell, 3 hours a night for a fortnight, because he was not building a case against Lord Cassius. He was waiting for the household to hand him a lawful reason to open 1 crate. An unpassed wagon at a household gate is not a suspicion. It is a breach. It is written on the gate post. He stopped it. Dace's men were with him, as they had been every morning at his request in writing, entered in the book. He required the wagon brought inside the wall and opened before the captain of the palace guard and the clerk of the book, which is the procedure, and which nobody had used in 90 years. There were 9 crates. 6 were estate effects, chairs, a bad portrait of somebody's uncle, a rolled carpet. 2 were the late Queen Isolde's. Her saddle, her books, 41 of them with her name in the front in her own hand, a pressed flower in one, a corner turned down in another, and I had to go and stand outside for a minute. Her riding gloves. A silver cup she had won at 11 years old at a village show and kept on her desk her whole life, which I know because it is in the inventory of her rooms at Folio 388, where it had been marked, at some point in the last 11 years, in a hand that was not Marrow's, disposed, worn, of no value. And the 9th crate held a black lacquer case, about the size of a hymn book, locked, with a plain gray ribbon knotted round it, and the knot was old, and the ribbon was faded, and the case had a name on a brass plate on the lid. Kell did not open it. He stood looking down at it for what felt like a very long time, and then he said, "Captain Dace, put your hand on this and swear what you see, and Miss Otley will write it, and then it goes into the stone room sealed, and it is opened in front of a court and the king and nobody else in the world." Dace said quietly, "Osric, open it." "No, ma'am. You've earned it." "I have not earned anything," said Kell. "That is the Queen's." If I break that ribbon with my own hands in a yard at 4 in the morning, then for the rest of my life the only answer to the question what was in the case is asterisk the keeper says so. It goes in sealed. It comes out in front of him. You cannot keep that quiet. 2 household men, 4 guardsmen, a carrier and a wagon. The whole palace knew by breakfast and the city knew by dinner. And by the end of the week the papers had a version of it, which was worse. Royal Guard SCIZES Queen Consort's son's property in dawn raid, with a drawing of Kell that made him look like a hangman. The household hit back on the Monday, and they hit properly, and this is where I stopped being able to sleep. They did not deny the crates, they did something cleverer. Lady Verena, mistress of the household warrants, gave a long, sorrowful, entirely reasonable statement. That the late Queen's effects had been asterisk gifted, in her lifetime and by her own wish, to Lord Cassius personally, who had been a young man of 25 when she died and had sat with her and read to her in her last weeks, that the family had never spoken of it because it was private, that they had been moving them north for safekeeping precisely because of the distress this palace's memories caused the king, that the new keeper of the threshold was a man with an 11-year grudge, who had been asterisk disciplined as a boy, a lie so thin you could read a newspaper through it, and who was now conducting a vendetta against a grieving family, and that they would produce, in due course, the deed. And she wept, and she was believable, and I watched half the palace decide that she was probably right. That is what a false floor is. It is not a lie you can catch. It is a lie with a deed behind it. The king sent for Kell on the 4th of Greenmonth, at 9 in the morning, and I was ordered to attend with the book, and I have never been so frightened in my life, before or since. I had seen King Alaric perhaps 200 times. Everyone in the palace sees the king, and you learn his walk before you learn his face. He was 61 that year, a big man gone quiet, not gone soft, gone quiet asterisk, the way a house goes quiet, and he worked, my God, how he worked. He was in his study at 6 every morning of his life, and he was, by every account I ever heard, a decent and painstaking and rather lonely king who had never in 11 years given anybody a reason to talk about him. He did not shout at Kell either. I have noticed that the powerful very rarely shout. It is the rest of us who shout. He stood at his window with his back to the room and he said, "Keeper, my wife's family have been in this palace 9 years. They have been kind to me. When I could not get out of a chair in the year after, it was Morwenna who got me out of the chair. And I do not say that to move you, I say it because it is a fact, and a king is not permitted to forget facts because they are inconvenient to him. No, sir. Her son is a fool with a bad estate. I have known that for a decade. Her daughter is sharp and she is proud, and she has been running this household since she was 22, and she has run it well." He turned round. "And you have my late wife's saddle in a stone room, and you have a lacquer case that you will not open, and you have been standing at a gate at 4 in the morning for a fortnight like a man waiting for something." "Yes, sir." "What are you waiting for, keeper?" And Kell said, "The truth about the night of the 14th of Ashmonth, sir. I have written a great many entries in that book, and the one I wrote that morning is 9 lines long, and it took me the rest of my life." The king did not move. It was the same stillness Kell had, which I have never got over, that these 2 men, who were about to break each other, had the identical way of holding absolutely still while something went through them. "Say that again," he said. "On the night the Queen died, sir, the Queen's door was cleared of its guard for 50 minutes by a written order bearing a forged countersignature, and a runner from the physician's lodge, carrying an urgent message from Dr. Cray that the Queen had taken a turn and was asking for you, was turned back at the Queen's gate at 8 minutes to midnight by the mistress of the household, who told him the message was countermanded, and that you had ordered you were not to be woken. The room was so quiet that I could hear my own pen not moving." "I gave no such order," the king said. "No, sir, I do not believe you did." I was not told she asked for me. No, sir. Dr. Cray told me she was comfortable. At 10 o'clock she was, sir. At 11:15 she was not, and he sent for you, and his messenger was turned back at a gate that is not searched and not written down. Kell's voice did not change at all. The gate log is Folio 409 of the book, sir. The night watch order is Folio 411. The runner is alive and keeps a boat hire at Marlow Reach. Dr. Cray's daybook is in the physician's lodge and records that she asked for you 4 times and that he told her, at the last, that you were on the stair. I did not look up. I could not look up. I heard a chair, and I heard a man sit down in it who had not intended to sit down. And then King Alaric of Eldermoor said, in a voice that had nothing in it at all, "Stop, sir. Stop, I am ordering you to stop." He had one hand flat on the desk. "You will close the gate inquiry. You will return Lord Cassius's property with an apology from this office. You will restore the courtesy of the Queen's gate. You will put the lacquer case in my hands, and you will strike the whole of this from the book, and you will do it today, and I will make you a captain of the colors and send you away from here, and none of us will ever say another word about it. That is an order from your king, keeper. Do you understand it?" And Kell said, "Yes, sir, I understand it. I refuse it." Nobody had said the word refuse in that room in 40 years. "Sir, I hold my office of the crown and not of the household, and I answer for the book to the crown, and there is a line in the book that says I may be removed by the king and by no one else, and you may remove me now, this minute, and I will lay the key on that desk and go out of that door. But while I hold it, I will not strike a true entry out of the book, and I will not hand a sealed case belonging to a dead queen to any man alive, including you, sir, outside a court. Because if I do, then there is no book, and there is no threshold, and there is nothing in this palace but whoever is currently strongest, and the next girl who stands at that ledge at 6:10 on a Tuesday with an order in her hand will lift the page out, sir, and she will be right too." The king stood up. He was a big man, as I have said, and I had never once seen him use it, and he did not use it then. He walked across the room and stopped in front of Kell, who did not move, and he looked at him for a long moment. "You were 19, he said. "It was you." "On the door?" "Yes, sir." "You walked away?" "Yes, sir," said Osric Kell. "I have had 11 years to be sorry. I do not intend to spend another 11. The king's face did something. It was the smallest thing in the world, and it lasted about a second, and I have thought about it for 20 years. "Get out," he said. He did not remove him. That is the whole hinge of it, and it took me years to understand what it cost. King Alaric could have ended Osric Kell's office with 4 words and a pen, that morning before lunch, and everyone in the household expected him to, and I think Kell expected him to. He didn't. He went to his study and closed the door, and for 11 days he did nothing at all, and the palace held its breath, and the papers screamed, and the household began, quietly and on the correct forms, to gather signatures for a petition of no confidence in the keeper of the threshold. And on the 12th day, the king's sister came back from the north. Princess Adela was 58, and she frightened everybody, because she was fair, not because she was cruel. She held the office of warden of the household court, one of those posts that had gone to sleep. The court had sat 4 times in her tenure, and 3 of those were about a disputed pension. She read the book for 2 days. All of it, the entries, the letters, the 14 good-humored declarations, Kell's flat record of his own conversations, and the refusal in the king's study, in my handwriting, signed by Kell, in which he had made no attempt to make himself sound better than he had been. Then she convened the court of the household in the chapter room and summoned the keeper of the threshold, the warden of the Queen's gate, the mistress of the household warrants, the captain of the palace guard, the clerk of the book, and, in the bravest thing anybody did that year, including Kell, the king himself, not as a party but to sit and hear it, because, She wrote in a summons that has been printed in every history since. The matter concerns the death of a queen of this realm and the honor of this house. It will not be decided in a corridor, and it will not be decided kindly, and it will not be decided out of the hearing of the man it was done to. The chapter room holds about 300 people, and it held about 400. Advocate Pell appeared for the household. He was very good, and I want to be honest about that, because it is easy afterwards to make the other side stupid. He did not attack Kell's evidence about the gate, because he did not have to. He conceded, instantly and gracefully, that Lord Cassius had been careless with a carrier's pass, that the household had been slow to declare, that the Queen's gate courtesy had grown lax and should be reformed. He gave all of it away in 4 minutes, and by giving it away he made it small. Then he went at the only thing that mattered. The keeper asks this court to believe that a young woman of 22, on the worst night of this house's history, conspired to keep a king from his dying wife. Why? What did she gain? Was the Queen's death her doing? No one alleges it, and no one could. The Queen died of a fever in her lungs, and every physician in the realm has said so. We are asked to believe in a plot whose entire achievement was 40 minutes of grief. I will tell you what really happened, and it is a sadder and a smaller thing, and it is the truth. A frightened girl of 22, left in charge of a household in chaos, was told by the physician at 10 o'clock that the king must sleep. At midnight a runner came to her gate. She made a decision. It was the wrong decision, and she has carried it since. She is not a criminal, and the keeper of the threshold, who was on that door, who was relieved from it, and who has spent 11 years unable to forgive himself, has found a way to give his own guilt to somebody else. I looked at the king. He was looking at his hands. And I thought with a coldness in my stomach, he is going to win. He is going to win because that story is kinder, and because it lets everybody go home, and because half of it is even true. Then Pell produced the deed. He had held it back deliberately, and he laid it in front of Princess Adela like a man laying down a stone. A deed of gift, 1 page, dated the 14th of Ashmonth. Signed Isolde R. Asterisk, witnessed by 2 of the household's people, giving to Lord Cassius of Harrogate in gratitude for his attendance in her illness, her books, her saddle, her personal effects, and such of my private things as he shall choose to keep in remembrance. It was on the Queen's own paper. It bore her seal. Advocate Pell said, "The keeper has spent a season telling this realm that Lord Cassius stole a dead woman's saddle. Here is her hand, giving it to him. Everything else the keeper has built stands on that theft, and the theft does not exist, and the court may examine the signature at its leisure. I invite it. I insist on it." The chapter room made a sound I have not heard before or since. Not a gasp, more of a settling, like a building giving up. Princess Adela turned the page over twice. "Keeper," she said, "have you anything to say to this document?" And Osric Kell, who had not slept, who had been drawn as a hangman in the papers, who had been offered a captaincy and a way out and had refused it, who had nothing left in the world but a dry page in an oak-boarded book, stood up and said, "Ma'am, I have never seen it before. May the clerk of the book examine it." And Adela said, "The clerk of the book will examine it." And 400 people turned round to look at a 26-year-old underclerk in a borrowed coat, and my ears rang, and I went down the aisle on legs that belonged to somebody else. I want to tell you that I saw it at once. I didn't. I stood at that table for 2 full minutes with 400 people watching me and could not see anything at all, because I was too frightened to be a clerk, and being a clerk is the only thing I know how to be. And then the fear went, the way it does, and what was left was the ordinary irritable pedantry that has made me impossible to live with all my life, and I looked at the deed the way I would look at any document put in front of me on any Tuesday. And I said, out loud, in the chapter room of the palace in front of the king, "It's dated the 14th. "Yes," said Advocate Pell pleasantly. "The 14th of Ashmonth, The day she died. A deathbed gift is not unusual, clerk. No, sir, but her hand had gone. The room changed. I could feel it change against my back. Dr. Cray's daybook, I said. The physician's lodge. The 12th of Ashmonth, P.T.'s right hand weak, cannot hold cup, feeding by attendant. The 13th, right hand useless. The 14th at 9 in the morning, asked P.T. to sign the quarter-day household register as is her custom. P.T. attempted, unable. Register signed by Mark, witnessed by Icray. I turned round to the ledge where the book was open, because I had put it there myself that morning and had not known why. Her last signature is in the book, I said. Folio 410. It's a cross, ma'am. She could not hold a pen. She made a cross, and Dr. Cray wrote her name beside it, and I have copied that page 4 times, and I have cried over it every single time, and that is the 14th of Ashmonth. And then I put my finger on the deed of gift, on the beautiful, fluent, confident signature of a woman who could not lift a cup. So either the Queen's hand came back to her, at some hour of the 14th, long enough to write a full deed in a firm running hand, and then went away again before 9 in the morning. Clerk, or somebody wrote this after she died, I said, and they wrote it last month asterisk, sir, because the ink is asterisk new asterisk. There is a thing that iron gall ink does. It goes brown. It takes about 7 years to be properly brown and about 20 to be the brown of Folio 411. Everybody in my trade knows this. Nobody else in the world does, because nobody else in the world has any reason to. The deed of gift, dated 11 years ago, was black. Advocate Pell, and I have never been able to decide whether to despise him or pity him, turned and looked at his instructing party with an expression I hope never to see on a man's face again, and Lady Verena, mistress of the household warrants, sitting very straight in gray, had already begun to stand up, which is the only mistake she made in the whole of that winter, and it was fatal, because 400 people saw her do it before anybody had accused her of anything. Princess Adela said, without any particular emphasis, "Sit down, Lady Verena." She sat down. "Advocate Pell," said the warden of the household court, "your document is withdrawn, or it is examined by 3 experts of my choosing and reported to the Crown's law." "Which?" Pell said. "Withdrawn, ma'am," in a voice like a dropped glass. "Then we are back," said Adela, "to why a family that owns a lawful gift would need to forge one." She let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to sit. "Keeper of the threshold," she said, "you have a folio, read it." He read it standing, in the flat voice of a man reading a duty roster, which is what it was. 22 lines, and the 11th of them his own name, his own post, his own hour. Then he closed the book. "Ma'am, I was 19 years old. A household man brought me a written order at 11:40 at night, and it bore the countersignature of the keeper of the threshold, and I read it, and I did not question it, because a countersigned order is the whole of a young man's world. I left the door of a dying queen, and I walked 90 yards down a corridor and stood at a window in the long gallery for 50 minutes, and while I stood there, she asked for her husband 3 more times. That countersignature is not Ansel Marrow's. He was at the threshold all that night and signed nothing, and he told me so with his own mouth, and it is in the book. I do not say who wrote it. The Crown's law may say who wrote it. I say only this, ma'am, because it is the one part of it that is mine, and I will not have anybody else carry it. Nobody made me leave that door. A paper made me leave that door, and I was the man who decided the paper was enough. I have been called a hangman in the papers, and I have refused my king to his face, and none of it puts me back on that door. I am not trying to be forgiven. I am trying to make sure that the next time a boy of 19 is handed a piece of paper in this palace, there is a book behind him that will not lie." And then Crown Prince Rowan stood up, and I do not think a single person in that room had known he was going to. He was 26 that year, my age exactly. We were born 8 days apart, which I have never told anybody. and he had been 15 on the 14th of Ash month, and in 11 years he had said almost nothing in public about his mother, and everyone had put that down to reserve. "Ma'am," he said, "I ask the court's leave to give evidence." Adela said, "You have it." "I was in the corridor," said the Crown Prince. "At about 11:45. I couldn't sleep. I went down to the Queen's door because I wanted to see my mother, and the door was open and the post was empty, and there was nobody there at all, and I remember thinking that it was wrong, that there is always a man on that door, that there has been a man on that door every night of my life. And I went in and my mother was awake and she was frightened, and she said, 'Where is your father?' And I said, 'He's coming.' And she said, 'Rowan, go and get him.' He stopped, nobody moved. 'So I ran,' he said. 'I went up the long gallery to get my father, and I was stopped at the head of the gallery by Lady Verena, who told me that the king had left orders that he was not to be woken, that the doctor had said so, that I was making it worse, and that I was to go to bed.' He was looking at his father. 'And I went to bed,' he said. 'I was 15 and somebody in a gray coat told me the rule, and I went to bed. And my mother died at 17 minutes to 1, and for 11 years I have believed that my father knew she was asking and chose to sleep. Because that is what I was told at the head of the gallery, and I have never asked him about it, because how do you ask a man that?' King Alaric had come up out of his seat about halfway, and had stopped there, in the most unbearable position I have ever seen a human body hold. 'Rowan,' he said. 'You didn't know,' said his son. 'I did not know. I would have.' And the King of Eldermoor stopped, because there was no end to that sentence that any man could have said out loud in a room with 400 people in it. Princess Adela let them stand there for about 10 seconds, and then she saved them, and I have loved her ever since. 'Keeper,' she said, 'the case.' The lacquer case was brought in on a tray, sealed, with the gray ribbon on it, and the seal was Dace's, and the entry was mine, and the book said where it had been every hour since it came out of the crate. 'Whose is it?' said Adela. 'Ma'am, the plate says I.R. Asterisk, it came out of a household wagon at 4 in the morning through an unsearched gate, in a crate of the late Queen's effects.' 'Has it been opened?' 'No, ma'am, not by me and not by anyone. It is locked and I have no key.' 'Lord Cassius,' said Adela, without turning her head, 'you have declared in 14 letters that this crate contained your personal estate effects. Do you have a key to your own case?' Lord Cassius, Warden of the Queen's Gate, said nothing at all. 'His Majesty will open it,' said Adela. 'It is his wife's.' They broke the lock, because there was no key in the world. It had been in a drawer of a dead woman's desk 11 years ago, and it was gone. Inside was a plain gray ledger, quarto, cheap, the kind a housekeeper uses, and it was not a diary, and it was not a letter, and it was not evidence of anything. It was an inventory. 41 pages of it in Isolde's own small hand, kept over the last 18 months of her life. Queen's Gate carrier Tuesday and Friday. Ask steward what goes out. Told laundry, have watched 3 weeks. It is not laundry. Lists. Dates. What had been in her rooms in the spring and what was not in them by the autumn. The silver cup gone June, and then 4 months later asterisk cup returned to my desk. Someone is being careful. A column of estimated values in her own arithmetic, added up wrong twice and corrected. A note. Have said nothing to A. He is worn to the bone with the North, and I will not put this on him until I am sure. Be sure, Isolde. And on the last written page, dated the 11th of Ash month, 3 days before she died, in a hand that was already beginning to fail, the letters getting bigger and looser and more determined. Am sure now, will tell him when the fever breaks. Have kept it plain and dull so that no one will look at it twice. And underneath that, because she had had a spare inch of paper and had known perfectly well that she was ill, in the largest and worst and most stubborn writing in the book. A. The roses at the south wall want cutting back. Do it yourself. Don't let them send a man. That is when the King of Eldermoor put his hand over his eyes, in front of 400 people, and wept. I am not going to make it fine. It was not fine. It was an old, worn, enormous man sitting down slowly in a chair with a cheap gray ledger in his hands, and it was the ugliest and truest sound I have ever heard in a public room, and the Crown Prince went and stood beside him with his hand on his father's shoulder and looked straight ahead at nothing, and Princess Adela said, in a voice that did not waver, "The court is adjourned for 1 hour," and 400 people went out into the corridor and stood there and did not talk to each other. Because now everybody understood, and it was so small. They had not been trying to keep a king from his wife's deathbed. Nobody in that household wanted Isolde to die alone. I have never believed it, and Kell never said it. They had been trying to keep a king from a conversation asterisk. A woman had been quietly writing down what went out of the Queen's gate, and a young mistress of the household had found out, and on the night of the 14th of Ashmonth, she thought she had one night to get that ledger out of the room before anybody else read it one night, while the physician had ordered the king to sleep, and the corridor was in chaos. They cleared the door so nobody would see her go in. They turned the runner back so the king would not come up the stair while she was in there. They bought themselves 50 minutes. They did not know the Queen had an hour left. Neither did she, neither did the doctor. That is the whole of it. That is what 11 years of a king's grief was bought with, not malice, not murder. A frightened young woman who wanted 50 minutes and got them, and then had to spend the rest of her life making the 50 minutes never have happened. The keeper of the threshold read the writ of severance in the chapter room at 4 o'clock that afternoon, standing at the ledge with the book open in front of him, and he read it in the same voice he read everything. He could not touch the Queen Consort, and he said so first, plainly. The keeper has no power over the Queen Consort of this realm. She resides here by her marriage and not by my warrant, and what is done about her is for the king and for no one else. But every other soul of that family was in the palace on a warrant of residence, and a warrant is not a right, not a title, not a thing that can be inherited or bought. It is a loan of the threshold. It is countersigned by the keeper, and it may be revoked by the keeper for one cause only, that the holder has used the keys and privileges of this house against this house. He revoked 41 of them. Lord Cassius, warden of the Queen's Gate, Lady Verena, mistress of the household warrants, their stewards, their secretaries, their carriers, their gatemen, the whole gray quiet machine that had been running out of the east wall for 9 years, every name entered, every cause stated, every one signed by his hand and witnessed by mine and Captain Dace's. The last of the 41 was Osgood Thrall, whose warrant was revoked for the recorded cause that he had, on the 18th of Frostmonth, drafted the order to lift folios 405 to 420 out of the book. Then he closed it, and said the thing that is on the plaque at the threshold now, and which I have heard schoolchildren recite, and which he did not know he was saying anything at all. A warrant is a loan, madam. This is the day it is called in. Morwenna heard the whole of it standing. She did not weep, and she did not shout, and she did not once look at her son or her daughter, and when it was finished, she said one sentence to Osric Kell, quite quietly, in front of everybody. "I got him out of the chair," she said. "Where were you?" And Kell said, 90 yards down the corridor, madam, at a window, being obedient. Now here is the law, and here is the last of it, and here is why the book exists. A writ of severance stands unless the king reverses it. He may reverse any of it and all of it, and no court and no keeper in Eldermoor may say a word to him about it. It is his house. But he must do it before the next sunrise, at the threshold, asterisk in his own hand, in the book, on the page below the writ, and the form of words is fixed and has not changed in 290 years. I, the king, find the cause here stated to be false, and I restore these warrants. He cannot delegate it, he cannot amend it, he can write that sentence or not write it. That is the whole design. What 290 years of people who had watched kings be tired and kind and lonely built into the first page of an oak-boarded book. That a king may undo anything he likes, in 1 minute, in his own handwriting, provided he is willing to write down that a true thing is false, and sign his name under it, and leave it there for 300 years. He came at 5:10 in the morning. There were perhaps 30 of us at the threshold. Kell at the ledge with the book open and the writ on it, still wet-looking in the lamplight. Adela, Rowan, Dace, the Queen Consort in a traveling coat standing quite straight, Cassius Gray, Verena, who had been weeping for 9 hours and had stopped, which was worse, and me with the pen. The king came up the 11 steps in shirt-sleeves under an old coat, like a man who had not been to bed, and he stopped at the ledge. Nobody said anything because there was nothing to say. It was in the book and he could read. He read it, all of it, every one of the 41 names and the cause under each, and it took him 11 minutes and nobody moved. Then he held out his hand for the pen, and I gave it to him, and my hand was steady, and I have never been prouder of anything my body has done. And King Alaric stood with the pen over the page for a long time. I know what he was doing. I have thought about it for 20 years, and I am certain. He was not deciding whether they deserved it. He was doing what a decent man does at 5 in the morning at the end of everything. He was looking for the version where nobody else has to be destroyed. She got him out of the chair. That was true. Her daughter had been 22 and frightened. That was true. His wife was dead either way, and no writ, and no page, and no ink would bring her up those stairs. He could write 1 sentence and every one of them could stay, and the whole of it would be over by breakfast, and he would only have to say that a true thing was false. He looked up at the keeper of the threshold, and he asked him the only question he had left. "Did she ask for me?" And Osric Kell said, "4 times, sir." The king put the pen down on the ledge. He did not sign. He stood with both hands flat on the slate on either side of the book, the same way Kell had stood on the first night, and I do not think either of them ever knew, and he lowered his head, and the palace was so quiet that we could hear the gulls on the river, and the King of Eldermoor wept at the threshold of his own house in front of 30 people, and not one of them ever spoke of it in a way that made it small. Then he straightened up and he said, in a voice like gravel, "Let it stand." They went out through the Queen's Gate at 7 in the morning, because that is where the household's wagons had always gone, and Kell had them go that way on purpose, and I did not understand why until years later, and now I think it was the only unkind thing he ever did, and I think he was entitled to it. The gate was searched. Every crate, every trunk, every bag entered in the book by the clerk of the book, which by then was me, because Kell had put my name forward that morning and Adela had confirmed it in 8 seconds. It took 4 hours, and there was nothing in any of it that was not theirs, and it did not matter. The point was never what was in the crates. The point was that from that morning, for the first time in 300 years, the Queen's Gate was a gate like any other, and a thing that goes out of that palace is written down. Lady Verena was tried by the Crown's law in the autumn on the forgery of the deed of gift and the forgery of a keeper's countersign, and she was convicted of both. She did not defend the second one, but pleaded to it, standing up, in about 4 words. Lord Cassius was convicted of the receiving and the removals and ordered to make restitution, which finished the bad estate in the north that had been finishing him for a decade anyway. Neither of them ever came back inside the wall. The law took the 14th of Ashmonth as far as it could and no further. There is no crime in Eldermoor called keeping a man from his wife and Princess Adela said so from the bench, in a sentence I have never got out of my head. The law can reach the forgery and the theft. The rest of it is between them and whatever they say to themselves at 4 in the morning. The king dealt with Morwenna himself in his own hand on his own paper, and did not consult the book about it, because it was not the book's business. She kept her title, because it was hers by marriage, and he would not take from her a thing she had not stolen. She lost the household, every key, every office, every warrant of it, and was retired to Tarnwick, which is a good house in a quiet county with a proper income and a garden, and she lives there still, and she is not permitted in the palace, and the king never once said a public word against her in the whole of the rest of his life. I have wondered whether that was mercy or exhaustion. I have decided it does not matter, and that it was, in any case, more than she gave him. Folio 411 is still in the book. We stitched it back in ourselves, Kell and I, in the stone room on a Thursday, with waxed linen thread, and we did it with the wrong needle on purpose, in a coarse, obvious, ugly stitch that anybody can see from 3 feet away, because Kell said that a book which hides its mends is worth nothing. Under it, on folio 412, in his own hand, on his first day as keeper of the threshold, he had already written the entry he told Ansel Marrow he would write. It is 11 words long, and it is signed, and it will be there when everyone alive is dead. Kell left the Queen's door on the 14th of Ashmonth. He never wrote another word about it. He did not add that he was 19, or that the order was forged, or that he was later the man who found out. He said the book was a register and not a defense. He stood at that door for 22 more years. He never married. He was offered the colors twice more and a barony once and refused all 3, and when he finally went, they carried him out through the threshold and down the 11 steps, and the book was open on the ledge, and I wrote the last line of his warrant myself, and I could not see the paper. I am 61 years old now, which is the age King Alaric was that winter, and I have been clerk of the book for 35 years, and there is one more thing and then I have finished. On the evening of the day they went out through the Queen's gate the same day. He did not wait a week. He did not wait an hour. The king went down to the south wall of the garden in his shirt-sleeves, with a pair of shears that he had gone to the potting shed and found himself, and he cut the roses back. He did it badly. He was a king. He had never cut a rose in his life. He was down there for 3 hours, and he took too much off the old wood, and the gardeners were in agony behind the yew hedge, and not one of them said a word to him. And Rowan came down after an hour and stood beside him and handed him things, and neither of them talked much. And at some point the crown prince took the second pair of shears and started on the far end. And at the top of the garden stair, 20 yards off, out of earshot and in plain sight, a man in a red wool tunic and a black bearskin stood his post with his hands behind his back and his eyes forward, and did not once look down at them, because a man is entitled to his own garden. They cut those roses back every Ashmonth after that, the 2 of them, for as long as the king lived. He never got any better at it. The roses did not seem to mind. They are still there at the south wall, and they are enormous now, and every gardener in that palace has been told the same thing on his first day in the same words, and will go on being told it long after I am gone. Not those, His Majesty does those himself.